And then who's the presiding judge?
I am the presiding judge.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make you the host of the meeting. Okay, you are now the host of the meeting. Don't start the round yet. I'm going to come back with the all clear in a few minutes.
Okay, I just have one question. I don't know if I know it was like an optional script, but I didn't know if I was supposed to receive it. I have not.
You have not? Okay, I will text Elliot so that he can get that to you.
Thanks.
And this is courtroom 9, right?
Yes.
Okay. Have you gotten the other materials that you were supposed to receive?
Yes.
There's not the script?
Yeah, I mean, unless it was in that same link, but I don't see it anywhere.
Okay, I texted Elliot. I'm going to go ahead and leave and check the other rooms, but I'll be back with the all clear in a few minutes.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Y'all are good to go ahead and start the round, but first, Soon, did you get the script Okay, good. So y'all are good to go ahead and start.
We just received the message to get started, so let's go ahead and call the case of the estates of Genesis Petrillo and Peony Estates and Harper Martini versus Peony Estates and Harper Martini. My name is Judge Sunia Buki, scoring judge. Please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen and remember to keep your audio and video off unless told to do otherwise. Have your video set to hide all non-video participants so that only the people on the screen right now should be the advocates and myself. Can the attorneys go ahead and make appearances?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Dara Da Silva, and alongside my co-counsels, Tori Leolu.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Rohit Shajan.
Good morning, Your Honor.
We represent the plaintiff in today's case, the estate of Genesis Petrillo.
Thank you.
May the defense give appearances now?
Yes.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Amber Mills, and I, along with my co-counsel, Vanessa Garcia.
Good morning, Your Honor.
And Alyssa Aguirre.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Represent the defendant, Harper Martini.
Good morning, Your Honor.
In today's case.
Okay. Are we ready for opening, counsel?
Before we proceed with opening, the plaintiff has a few housekeeping matters, if that is all right.
Go ahead.
First and foremost, we would like to indicate for the sake of clarity that we as the plaintiff are pursuing battery. Next, we would like to ask for what your preferences are for sharing screen. Do we need to ask you for permission before doing so?
You don't need to ask for permission, but just indicate that you're sharing the screen before you share the screen.
May we assume that when we share the exhibit to the witness that it is constructively out of the view of the jury before it is entered?
Yes.
As well, we would like to indicate that exhibits 1 through 10 per the stipulations are pre-admitted, and both sides waive any objections to those exhibits.
Is that correct, defense counsel?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. That's all right.
We would also like to invoke Rule 615, the constructive sequestration of all witnesses except for party representatives.
Yeah, granted.
May we assume that all witnesses are pre-sworn?
Yes.
With that, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed with opening statements.
Defense counsel, any housekeeping matters?
Yes, Your Honor, just a few. May we assume that all exhibits have been pre-marked?
So there was the exhibits that are pre-admitted and you're saying all exhibits should be pre-marked?
Yes, Your Honor. May we also treat you as judge and jury?
Yes.
And at this time, I'd also like to note that our party representative under Rule 615 is Harper Martini. And then I would also like to ask, do you have a preference for sitting or standing during closing or opening arguments?
Whatever is comfortable for y'all. There is no preference for me, just whatever is comfortable, whatever you guys have prepared and works for you, works for me.
Yes, Your Honor. And time allowing, may we have a brief recess at the conclusion of the plaintiff's case in chief?
Yes, we will have a recess after both cases in chief.
With that, the defense is ready to proceed.
Okay. And I want to see your name. Ms. Da Silva, I guess plaintiffs, are you ready for your opening? I don't know who's giving the opening.
Yes. Ms. Leah Lewis.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead now and hear opening statements from each party. Everyone should make sure they are in speaker view. That button is in the upper right of your screen. And then attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. Okay. And plaintiffs, you are ready to go. I'm not seeing anybody on speaker view.
Your Honor, may I proceed?
You may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, and members of the jury, may it please the court. Petrillo was the problem. Pesticides were the solution. Members of the jury, this is Genesis Petrillo. She was a PhD grad student with a vibrant future ahead of her in Paris. She was also the fiancée of Casey Soto, and their wedding was supposed to take place on June 8th, 2019. Located in Rapid River Valley, Midlands, the wedding was to occur at the defendant Harper Martini's winery, Peony Estates. You'll learn today that Miss Petrillo's dreams and goals were ripped away from her when she tragically died due to pesticide poisoning on what was supposed to be the best day of her life. Why? Well, because in the defendant Harper Martini's own words, he wanted nothing more than for Miss Petrillo to be gone, out of the picture. So much so that on June 7th, the defendant mixed pesticides into a bottle of wine that he later gave to Miss Petrillo to drink, ultimately leading to Miss Petrillo's dying breath. Through the testimony of our three witnesses today, you'll learn that there were two reasons that made Petrillo the problem and pesticides the solution. The first of those reasons being that Miss Petrillo was a threat to the business that the defendant hoped to pass on to his daughter one day. And the second of those reasons being that Miss Petrillo ultimately stood in the way of the relationship between the defendant and his daughter, Casey Soto. Now, the first witness you'll hear from today is Casey Soto, the daughter of the defendant and the fiancée of the deceased. Miss Soto will describe how the defendant's relationship with Miss Petrillo was rife with tension. More importantly, Miss Soto will testify today that on the evening of June 7th, she ate and drank all of the same things that Miss Petrillo did, excluding one very important thing, however, the poisoned wine that the defendant gave to Miss Petrillo and Miss Petrillo only. Now, the next witness you'll hear from today is Dr. Jim Kwan, the chief emergency physician who treated Miss Petrillo leading up to her death. Dr. Kwan will testify how she determined Miss Petrillo's cause of death to be respiratory failure due to pesticide poisoning. More specifically, Dr. Kwan will testify today that Miss Petrillo died because she ingested a wine that was contaminated with an organophosphate pesticide on the evening of June 7th. And the last witness you'll hear from today is Angel Rodriguez, a dear friend of Miss Petrillo who was with her leading up to the moments of her tragic death. Miss Rodriguez will testify to the open hostility between the defendant and Miss Petrillo. In addition, the symptoms that Miss Rodriguez will describe that she witnessed are the exact same symptoms of pesticide poisoning that Dr. Kwan will testify to in court today. And that is why we as the plaintiff are suing the defendant, Harper Martini, for the battery of Genesis Petrillo. As the plaintiff in today's case, there are three elements of battery that we will prove to you today. The first of those being that the defendant mixed pesticides into the wine that they later gave to Miss Petrillo. The second being that the defendant did so with the intent to poison Miss Petrillo. And the third being that Miss Petrillo died on the morning of June 8th as a direct result of the poison wine that was given to her by the defendant, Harper Martini. As the plaintiff in today's case, we have the burden to prove that it was more likely than not that the defendant, Harper Martini, acted with the intent to poison Miss Petrillo. Members of the jury, if there is one thing to take away from today's case, it's that Petrillo was the problem and pesticides were the solution. And that is why at the end of today's trial, my co-counsel, Dara Da Silva, will come before you and ask that you find the defendant, Harper Martini, liable for the battery of Genesis Petrillo. Thank you.
Defense counsel,
May I proceed, Your Honor?
you may.
May it please the court. Your Honor, members of the jury, opposing counsel, my name is Alyssa Aguirre, and I, along with my colleagues, are here to represent the defendant, Harper Martini. One too many drinks, one too many explanations. On the evening of June 7th, 2019, Mr. Martini joined his daughter, Casey Soto, and his soon-to-be daughter-in-law, Genesis Petrillo, in the rehearsal dinner for their wedding. The night was full of champagne toasts, mingling, and more drinks among the wedding party. But unfortunately, that same night ended in unforeseen tragedy. Casey Soto's fiance, Miss Genesis Petrillo, was rushed to the hospital where she would later pass away on the morning of June 8th, 2019. Ladies and gentlemen, all it took was one too many drinks in Miss Petrillo's system that would lead to her untimely passing. So why are we here today? Well, we're here because the estate of Genesis Petrillo is alleging that Harper Martini, aka her future father-in-law, played a role in her death. The plaintiff will try to prove to you that Harper Martini committed battery against Genesis Petrillo, that he intentionally poisoned her with a bottle of wine mixed with pesticide. But ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the facts of the case today will show you that Harper Martini would not be capable of such action. Mr. Martini was not only a great father to Casey, but he would describe his relationship with them, the active role that Harper played in her life, despite being a single parent. And regardless of the issues between Harper and Genesis, the evidence will show that Harper would never go as far as causing harm to Genesis Petrillo. You see, it's important to note today that as the defense, we have nothing to prove to you. In the state of Midlands, it is the plaintiff that bears the burden of proving every element of their claims of battery as true, that Harper Martini is liable by a preponderance of the evidence. First, they will have to show that Harper Martini committed an act against Genesis Petrillo. Second, they will have to prove that he intended to cause harm with said act. And lastly, that the alleged act resulted in harm to Genesis Petrillo. However, you will realize from the facts today that the plaintiff will fail to prove that Mr. Martini took any action towards Genesis Petrillo, and this fact alone will prevent the plaintiff from meeting their burden. And to further prove this fact, you will hear testimony from 3 key witnesses. First, Harper Martini himself will take the stand to express his care and love for Casey Soto and how much he only wanted the best for her. He will then describe his work at Peony Estates and how much the business mattered to him with the knowledge he's gained over the years and the experience he's gained. He will describe lastly, he will teach the jury exactly how common it is to have traces of pesticide and even other levels of contaminants in wine that is not organically grown. Next, Blair Osborne will take the stand and help the jury see exactly how great of a person Harper Martini was. He will describe that throughout their entire professional relationship, Mr. Martini was only diligent and kind when it came to business. In fact, he will provide further detail about the relationship between Harper and Casey and how much he wanted to support her. And then lastly, Dr. Cannon will take the stand to provide expert testimony that will explain that there were one too many other possible explanations for the death of Genesis Petrillo, specifically alcohol poisoning. And in the closing, my co-counsel, Ms. Garcia, will speak to you one last time. She will discuss with you exactly how the plaintiff has failed to meet their burden and prove that it is more likely than not that Mr. Martini took any harm towards Genesis Petrillo. And after the witness testimony, many things will remain unclear. That there were one too many drinks and one too many explanations. Ladies and gentlemen, all it takes is one too many drinks for the effects of alcohol poisoning to start taking control of the body, and that, members of the jury, more likely than not, was the case in the death of Genesis Petrillo. The evidence only points to one verdict, and that is to find Harper Martini not liable. Thank you.
Okay. Are we ready to call our first witness, plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Casey Soto to the stand.
Okay, well, before we do that, I'll ask everybody to switch to gallery view, which is the buttons on the upper right of your screen, so that we can see attorneys and witnesses at the same time. And you can hide, I believe you can hide non-witness participants if that makes it easier for you. Give me 1 second. Okay, go ahead.
Good morning. Would you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Casey Soto. I'm the daughter of the defendant, Harper Martini, and I'm the former fiance of Genesis Petrillo.
Now, Ms. Soto, I'd like to talk about your relationship with Genesis. How did you two meet?
Well, I've always been a bit shy, never much of a partier. But one night in 2012, my friend Drew invited me to this party, to try to get me to loosen up and have fun for once. And that's when I met the love of my life. And, after years of feeling so stifled and self-conscious, Genesis made me feel like I was free to be myself.
You said you felt stifled. What do you mean by that?
I mean, my dad was great and everything, don't get me wrong, but he could be a little overbearing and kind of controlling, especially as I got older. When I moved away to Midland Center for college, he showed up every weekend, literally every weekend, with gifts and endless questions about what I was doing and who I was hanging out with. And I know he means well, I really do, but oftentimes it got to be a bit much.
Now, Ms. Soto, I'd like to talk about Genesis a bit more. Did you take Genesis to meet your dad?
I did in 2015.
How did that interaction go?
Not great. You see, my dad had just opened up Peony Estates that year, and he was super proud of his wine, but I'd never mentioned this to Genesis before. So when he offered her a glass of one of his wines, she asked him if he had anything classier, and as you can imagine, the damage was already done. From that point on, anytime Genesis's name came up, my dad would complain about how Genesis didn't respect him or his hard work.
Now, when did the two of you get engaged?
In July of 2018, it was this beautiful, intimate affair at Midland's Botanical Gardens.
How did Mr. Martini react to the news?
My dad freaked out about it. Things had already been so tense between the two of them. There was already so much tension, and the engagement only seemed to make things so much worse.
What do you mean by make things worse?
Before this point, I had to actively make sure the two of them weren't in the same room to keep them from fighting. That became impossible once we started planning the wedding. My dad wanted to be involved with everything, the colors, the flowers, even the location.
Where did you plan to have the wedding?
Well, Genesis and I were originally going to have it at Rosie and Pedro, a local winery. That's where we first met, actually, at that party that I mentioned. And it would have been really romantic, but, my dad had other plans.
What were those other plans?
Well, if there's one thing that my dad drilled into my head constantly, Peony Estates was for me to run someday. He loved the idea of me taking over the family business. And to be honest, that's when Genesis really started becoming a problem.
How did Genesis become a problem?
Genesis and I had plans to move to Paris. She'd received a great job offer there. I wanted to keep the whole thing under wraps because I knew that my dad would throw a fit, try and stop me, but Genesis, she let it slip.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes, go ahead.
relevance has an extremely low bar, and in order for this to be relevant, it has to make a fact in this case more or less probable. In this case, the motives of Harper Martini and how he would react to Genesis wanting to move away with Casey Soto does make a fact in this case more probable, that being that Harper Martini would in fact poison Genesis Petrillo. Therefore, it is relevant.
Ms. Aguirre, what is your argument that it's not relevant?
I would like to say that I don't believe that whether or not they moved to Paris, or if they had plans to move to Paris at all, are relevant to this case, nor make any facts of the case more or less likely.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You can ask the question, or you can answer the question. Sorry.
Now, Ms. Soto, how did Mr. Martini react to the news of the move to Paris?
My dad was extremely upset. He told me that he didn't care if Genesis moved to France or ended up 6 feet under, as long as I stayed here in Midlands.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond? This is an exclusion to hearsay under 801D2, as it is an opposing party statement. You're muted, Your Honor.
Yeah, I know. I'm realizing that. I'm going to keep myself unmuted so I don't have that problem again. Defense counsel, why do you think this is hearsay?
They are offering the statement for the truth of the matter asserted that, I'm so sorry. The witness is trying to use their statements to show that Harper acted in conformity there with the statements or the actions that were within the statement.
Whose statements? Because we have a couple different statements. We have
The statement.
the
I'm
deceased
sorry,
and then the defendants. Is that correct?
Your Honor, I believe she objected to the statements of Harper Martini, specifically that the 6 feet under or move to Paris comment.
Right. Is that correct, Ms. Aguirre?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, I'm going to overrule the objection.
Ms. Soto, to be clear, how did Mr. Martini react to the news?
He was extremely upset, and like I said, he told me that he didn't care if Genesis moved to France or ended up 6 feet under, as long as I stayed here in Midlands.
How did these words make you feel?
I was really upset, of course, because all I wanted was for the two most important people in my life to just get along. All I wanted was for my dad to respect my decision to go to France. And all I wanted was for my wedding to be a fairy tale, but that seemed less and less likely by the day.
Now, Ms. Soto, I know this is difficult, but I'd like to talk about the wedding rehearsal. How did that go on June 7th?
Oh, it was terrible. My dad and Genesis snapped at each other constantly. My hope for this fairy tale wedding got less and less likely. I even contemplated canceling.
Did you go through with canceling?
No, I talked to Genesis about it, and she said that she would respect my decision if that's what I wanted, but that she wanted nothing more in the world to marry me. And she also confessed in that conversation that she was worried my dad might try something to hurt her or embarrass her.
Did you talk to Mr. Martini as well about your thoughts on canceling?
I did, but it was a very different conversation than the one I had with Genesis. My dad started excitedly telling me how it would be so much better to just stay in Midlands and run Peony Estates with him.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond?
I'll overrule the objection if it's Mr. Harper's statement or Mr. Martini's statement.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Ms. Soto, I'd like to talk about the rehearsal dinner. How did that go?
Tensions seemed to have died down in the beginning. Genesis, we gave her speeches, and there were some really sweet toasts from friends, but tensions ramped back up when my dad and Genesis started making these awful snide remarks at each other.
Did anything else happen between the two of them that night?
Yeah, there was a moment where my dad grabbed the microphone and made this really big show out of giving Genesis a bottle of wine. That she was really confused, or she seemed confused to me. at this whole thing because things had been so tense between them the entire night.
Did Genesis drink the wine?
She poured several glasses for herself. Yeah.
Did anyone else drink the wine?
Not that I saw. I certainly didn't drink it, and I didn't see anyone else drink from it. And it wouldn't be the first time I saw Genesis pour multiple glasses of wine for herself. You know, she had this running joke that she was a wine mom in the making.
Now, Miss Soto, what happened after that point?
I wouldn't know. I mean, I went to bed early and I kissed Genesis good night before I left, and I didn't know that that was going to be the last time that I saw her alive.
Miss Soto, I'm so sorry. I know this is difficult, but what happened the next morning?
I started getting ready, and then my dad came into my room and let me know that Genesis was nowhere to be found.
Did you believe him?
I didn't at first, not until Angel came into my room to tell me that Genesis had fallen into a coma.
Did you go to visit Genesis?
We immediately rushed to the hospital, and the whole thing is a blur. But the only thing I remember is that we were too late because we got there at 9:32 and Genesis died at 9:27, and I never got to say goodbye.
I'm so sorry, Miss Soto, but it's important for the jury to understand. Did you find out what happened to Genesis?
The doctor said that it was poisoning, possibly pesticide poisoning.
What did you think when you heard this?
Thought was Peony Estates, but at the time I didn't know if I could believe that would be true. I mean, Genesis and I drank and ate all the same things that night, except for that bottle of wine that my dad gave her.
Miss Soto, what do you think happened to Genesis?
I don't know what to think anymore. You know, I've been having such a hard time with the grief. And I know Genesis's family thinks that my dad had something to do with this. I don't want to think that my only parent would do something like this, but at the same time, it just seemed to me like my dad hated Genesis. So I don't know if I can really trust him either.
Sorry for your loss, Miss Soto. No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Counsel, defense counsel.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Miss Soto, you and Miss Petrillo initially planned to have your wedding at Rosie and Pedro, correct?
We did, yeah. It's where we first met, and we thought it would be a really romantic place to get married, you know?
But Harper requested to move your wedding to Peony Estates.
Yeah, my dad did. It would have been good publicity for him.
And because you moved the venue, Harper paid for a large portion of the wedding costs.
That was the deal we had, yes.
And as you mentioned a moment ago, Harper Martini planned to use this, your wedding photos for advertising or publicity.
Yeah, having his only daughter's wedding at his business would look great. It would give him a chance to throw this huge, elaborate wedding. It would bring a lot of new customers into Peony Estates.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. Which is why Harper wanted the wedding to be picture perfect for both you and her, or him.
Yeah, yes, my dad was super involved with all the planning. I know he wanted everything to be as perfect as he could in his vision, you know.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention to a party on May 11th, 2019 at Black Bear Casino. The wedding party was intoxicated that night, correct?
I think so.
And to be clear, this did include Genesis Petrillo.
Yeah, he definitely drank that night. I think we all did.
And as a result of Miss Petrillo's intoxication, she had gotten sick to the point of throwing up.
Objection, Your Honor, as to character evidence under Rule 404 may I be heard.
Yes.
Your Honor, I believe that defense counsel is using this instance at the Black Bear Casino to prove conformity therewith, that Genesis was drunk that night and drank a lot, and that Genesis would drink a lot on the night of June 7th, 2019. Therefore, it is inadmissible character evidence under Rule 404.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes.
Pursuant to Rule 405, as the fiance of Genesis Petrillo, Casey Soto is qualified to testify to her reputation, which includes her drinking habits.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
Even though Ms. Soto was qualified to testify about it, it does not change the fact that defense counsel is still offering it to prove conformity therewithin.
Okay, defense counsel, what is the rule that you're relying on? I'm going to look at it real quick.
Rule 405.
And plaintiff's counsel, what rule are you relying on?
404.
Okay. Okay, I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
I'm going to ask my question again. To be clear, when everyone was intoxicated, this did include Genesis, correct?
That's what I remember. Yeah.
And as a result of her intoxication, Genesis had gotten sick to the point of throwing up.
Yeah, I remember that happening.
But it wouldn't be out of character for Genesis to consume alcohol to that extent.
Not necessarily. I mean, she drank a lot, but I mean, lots of people drink a lot.
In fact, the first time you met Genesis, she was drinking, correct?
I mean, it was a party. So, of course, we all were.
And the last time you saw Genesis at the rehearsal dinner, she was also still drinking with the guests.
I mean, yeah, but again, it was our wedding rehearsal. We were all trying to have a good time, so she was drinking, but a lot of people were drinking that night.
Is that a yes to my question?
That is a yes to your question. I'm sorry, it's just so hard.
I understand, Ms. Soto. Now, I'd like to focus more on the relationship between Harper and Genesis. The two of them didn't get along, correct?
Not at all. You know, my dad always felt that the Genesis never respected him or his hard work, and that really upset him.
But it had always been that way, though.
Yes, I described the moment that the two of them met in 2015 over dinner, and ever since the incident with the wine glass, things have been tense between them. Lots of tension.
But on the night of the, But on the night of the rehearsal dinner, Harper had given Genesis a gift, correct?
Yeah, it really seemed to confuse Genesis because things had been so tense that entire night up until he gave her the bottle of wine.
But you didn't expect Harper to do this gesture, or to make this gesture, I'm sorry.
No, the two of us were both really surprised by it.
However, you still felt that this exchange was still sincere, though, on the part of Harper.
Yeah, I wanted to believe that my dad had finally understood how important Genesis was to me, you know, that he'd finally come around.
Thank you, Ms. Soto. So is that a yes to my question, though?
That is a yes to your question.
And despite the nature between Harper and Genesis, you didn't think that Harper would physically harm Genesis.
Like I said before, I don't know what to think. I don't want to believe that my dad is capable of doing something like that, but I remember how much he seemed to hate Genesis, so I really don't know.
But you would agree that as your parent, Harper Martini only wanted the best for you.
Of course. I mean, I like to think that any parent just wants what's best for their kid, you know?
So that is a yes to my question.
That is the answer to your question.
I pass this witness, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor, I just asked that my witness be allowed to step down.
Okay. Okay, Plaintiff's counsel, are you ready for your next witness?
Your Honor, plaintiff now calls Dr. Jimin Kwan to the stand.
Okay. Dr. Kwan, you have been pre-sworn.
Your Honor, may I proceed?
Your Honor, one second. I'm sorry. Our attorney just got kicked off the Wi-Fi, the one that's supposed to be going right now.
Okay,
So
well, we can just take a little break. Not a break, but just hold on. Yeah.
that we'll let you know as soon as she's on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Your Honor, my Wi-Fi is back, so the defense is ready to continue.
Okay, we'll go ahead and proceed.
Judge Kwan, are you ready? Your Honor, may I proceed?
You may.
Would you introduce yourself to the court, please?
My name is Dr. Jimin Kwan.
And what is your current occupation?
I'm the chief emergency physician at River Valley Hospital. I quickly and accurately diagnose patients that come into my emergency room, and I'm very good at it.
And Dr. Kwan, how long have you been at your current position?
I've been at River Valley Hospital for about 5 years now.
And could you describe your educational background to the court, please?
Yes, I earned my medical degree at North Carolina School of Medicine.
Dr. Kwan, how did you come to be involved in this case?
I became involved with this case when EMTs brought Genesis Petrillo into my emergency room.
And in order to form your expert conclusion, what materials did you review?
Yes, I reviewed the toxicology report as well as Petrillo's wine bottle.
And are your conclusions the product of reliable methods and principles?
Yes, they are. I reviewed the patients as well as congregating with my fellow doctors and nurses to come to this conclusion.
Have you reliably applied these principles and methods to form your conclusions?
As well as I can, yes.
And in doing so, Dr. Kwan, what is, in your expert opinion, the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death?
Objection, Your Honor. Pursuant to Rule 702, I would also like to draw your attention to the cases of Davis v. Adams and Tarrant Readers Association v. Merrill Dow. May I be heard?
Give me 1 second, I'm gonna pull up the case.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, Your Honor. Pursuant to Rule 702, this witness has not met all the qualifications to be qualified as an expert today. There are certain prongs that have to be met today. In regards to the case of Davis v. Adams, each of these prongs has to be met to a preponderance of the evidence. Furthermore, in Tarrant Readers Association v. Merrill Dow, which relates specifically to 702C, the court is entitled to know what sorts of principles and methods they use, if they have been tested, subject to peer review, if they're widely accepted in her field. I do not believe that this testimony has been elicited today, and therefore this witness cannot be qualified as an expert.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, the Rule 702, I believe the witness has already fulfilled all of those requirements. She has already stated that she has come to this expert conclusion based on reliable methods and principles, primarily her continuing education, her 5 years of experience as the chief ER, as the doctor in the ER, as well as concurring with other physicians to form her expert conclusion.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Tell me, Defense Counsel, Ms. Garcia, tell me what specific.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Specifically 702C. While not dispositive, this witness, the court is entitled to know what sorts of principles and methods they used, if they have been tested, if they've been subject to peer review, if they're widely accepted in their field, these sorts of things. I do not believe that this testimony has been elicited in great enough extent today.
Ms. Garcia, I'll give you the opportunity to take the witness on voir dire if that's what you want to do. Oh, did yes. I'm going to overrule the objection, but feel free to renew it at a later time.
Yes, Your Honor.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Kwan, let me re-ask my question. What was, in your expert opinion, the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death?
It is my expert's opinion that Genesis Petrillo was poisoned by an organophosphate pesticide, which was found in the wine she drank.
Dr. Kwan, now I'd like to turn your attention to the day that Genesis Petrillo was brought into your ER. Do you clearly remember the events of June 7th, 2019?
Yes, I do.
And upon Genesis Petrillo entering your ER, what was your initial evaluation of the patient?
When Genesis initially came into my ER, I thought she was experiencing alcohol poisoning, but upon further inspection, I realized that was not the case.
And what made you change your initial evaluation of alcohol poisoning to pesticide poisoning?
So someone that had been experiencing alcohol poisoning would have dilated pupils, but her pupils were contracted. As well, she was experiencing a slowed heartbeat as well as intense sweating.
And upon your evaluation, what was your course of treatment for the patient?
So when the patient came in, I originally thought it was alcohol poisoning. I began stomach pumping as well as taking samples of her vomits. But later on, when I realized it was organophosphate pesticide, I administered an antidote.
And upon administering the antidote and your other treatments, could you describe the progression of the symptoms?
Yes, Ms. Petrillo had a rapid succession of symptoms. First, she was vomiting, which was due to digestive issues. And then it later progressed to high intensity sweating, and her heartbeat was slowed, her speech was slurred. And she later had bronchospasms, which I heard by using my stethoscopes to listen to her lungs. And then she later went into a coma.
Now, Dr. Khan, I'd like to talk to you about Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content. What was Genesis Petrillo's blood alcohol content?
Her blood alcohol content was 0.16.
Dr. Kwan, is a blood alcohol content of 0.16 sufficient enough to cause death or other severe symptoms like what Genesis Petrillo experienced?
No, according to my knowledge, blood alcohol content would have to be between 0.35 to 0.50 for someone to actually die. Ms. Petrillo was more at risk of passing out.
Now, let me shift your attention to the organophosphate pesticide. What exactly is organophosphate pesticide?
Organophosphate pesticide is a type of isophenphos which can be found in nerve gas and pesticide, just to name a few things.
Did you find any organophosphate pesticide in Genesis Petrillo's body?
Yes, there was quite a lot of organophosphate pesticide in her toxicology report.
Dr. Kwan, how often do you come into contact with cases dealing with organophosphate pesticide?
Well, I specialize in toxicology, so I come into contact with these kind of cases nearly every day on the job.
And in what ways can organophosphate pesticide enter a human body?
So organophosphate pesticide can enter through the skin. It can also enter through the nasal cavity. But in Ms. Petrillo's case, she ingested it orally.
And what symptoms would a person exhibit if they had ingested the pesticide?
So they would experience a rapid succession of symptoms. First, the vomiting and digestive issues. then bronchospasms in the lungs, and in the most severe cases, paralysis and nerve issues, which can ultimately lead to death, which is what happened in this Genesis case.
Dr. Kwan, are these symptoms similar to the symptoms that Genesis Petrillo exhibited?
Yes, they are.
Would a person ingesting the pesticide be able to identify it if it were possibly mixed into another alcoholic beverage?
No, according to my prior knowledge, organophosphate pesticide is tasteless and colorless in nature. So if someone ingested it, they wouldn't know.
And in your expert opinion, was the wine tainted with organophosphate pesticide?
Yes, it was tainted with organophosphate pesticide.
No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. You were Ms. Petrillo's treating physician on June 8th, correct?
That's correct.
When Ms. Petrillo first arrived at the hospital, she was having trouble responding.
Yes, but she told me she had drunk quite a lot of wine. Yes.
Yes, she smelled of wine
Yes.
and she appeared to be intoxicated.
Yes, but after further inspection, I realized she wasn't, like that wasn't the case.
But that's a yes to my question. She appeared to be intoxicated.
Yes.
Now, Ms. Petrillo was experiencing a variety of symptoms that night, correct?
That was correct. Yes.
A good amount of those symptoms were actually consistent with alcohol poisoning.
Yes, that's correct. But it was also consistent with organophosphate pesticide poisoning as well.
Yes, we'll get there, Dr. Kwan, but that's a yes to my question. And you suspected this to be an organophosphate poisoning case because of those other symptoms that she was experiencing, correct?
Yes.
Symptoms like bronchospasms.
Yes.
And the dilated pupils, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You later found out that Ms. Petrillo's stomach contents actually consisted mostly of wine.
Mostly of wine, yes, but it also contained isopentols and organophosphate pesticide.
But her stomach contents was primarily wine.
Yes, but it also contained pesticide, yes.
And through further examination of Ms. Petrillo, you found that she actually had a blood alcohol content level of 0.16.
That's correct, yes.
Now, you're aware that someone's blood alcohol content is not something that stays consistent throughout the night.
Yes, but by the time she arrived, from the time I took her blood alcohol content, there simply wasn't enough time for it to lower to such a number.
But doctor, there's no way that you could pinpoint what her peak BAC was that night.
Her peak BAC. So yes, that is correct, but also not correct, because there is no way for her blood alcohol content to lower to such a low degree by the time she came to my hospital. But that's not how blood alcohol content works.
But Dr. Kwan, there's no way that you could tell us what her peak BAC was that night.
Objection to your answer. Asked and answered.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes.
This witness has not answered the question. She's avoiding the question. It's a very simple yes or no answer.
Counsel, I understand this is an expert witness, and I believe she answered your question with just a more detail that it's not necessarily a yes or a no. So I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your
Asked and
Honor.
answered.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Dr. Kwan, earlier you testified that it's unlikely for someone to die from a BAC lower than 0.3, correct?
Yes.
But in your experience, you've actually seen deaths due to blood alcohol content as low as 0.22.
Those are very few cases, but hers wasn't even at that level. It was 0.16, so that's nowhere near 0.22.
Yes, doctor, but that's a yes to my question. You've seen cases where people have died from a blood alcohol content of 0.22.
Yes, that is correct.
And had Miss, excuse me, Had Ms. Petrio's BAC been higher, this could have been a possibility.
Yes, but also according to my prior knowledge, when someone ingests pesticide, they actually make the symptoms of alcohol poisoning worse. So along with the pesticide she injected, it would actually—
Your Honor, to non-responsive.
Because this is an expert, I'm gonna overrule.
Yes, Your Honor.
Yeah.
Dr. Kwan, so it is a possibility, correct?
I believe I said yes, but I was also saying that along with the pesticide poisoning, it would have made the symptoms even worse for her, yes.
Now, Dr. Kwan, you also testified to the fact that there are a few different ways that someone can become contaminated through an organophosphate poison, correct?
Yes, I do.
And you, in the materials that you reviewed for this case today, you actually reviewed Miss Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, correct?
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
Your Honor, I believe that there's an objection on the floor.
Your Honor, objection was raised by the plaintiff. May I be heard?
Yeah, did I not hear you? What happened?
I believe the witness might have started a couple of words of her response.
Okay, I didn't realize it ended up, okay, go ahead. Yeah, what's your objection?
Your Honor, if the witness was to answer that question, she would have to, her testimony would contain inadmissible hearsay because the counsel is asking the witness to refer to Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, which contains out of court statements and therefore would be inadmissible hearsay.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes.
Pursuant to Rule 703, an expert's basis into their findings and their conclusions, the materials that they reviewed is admissible in court if its probative value is, if it has probative value. If I may proffer, this goes directly to, if I may proffer, today the plaintiff is trying to show that as a result of the wine that Ms. Petrillo ingested, she passed away due to pesticide poisoning. The statements that will be elicited show that there was another person who had this same type of contact with the wine and exhibited no other symptoms.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
Your Honor, even if the probative value was that the statement that the witness would make, it would be more prejudicial than probative. And I'd also like to cite case law Richards versus Mississippi Barbecue, which states that any statements that would otherwise be admissible are not inadmissible simply because they are offered through an expert witness.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Give me 1 second, I'm gonna.
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, defense counsel, can you tell me what I don't want to take too long. What was your question that drew the objection?
Yes, Your Honor. I asked if she recalled reading Ms. Rodriguez's affidavit in preparation for today's case.
Okay, I'm going to overrule the objection if that was the question, but feel free to renew it. Mr. Is it Shajan? Shajan? How do I say that? Shajan?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
okay, so I'm seeing what's happening when I'm looking. I can see you moving, but when you first start, I'm having trouble hearing you. So just be mindful of whenever you start. The volume's a little low when you start, but then it picks up. So just FYI. Feel free to renew it if we get further into it, but she can answer the question if that's what she relied on.
So Dr. Kwan, in preparation for today's case, you reviewed Ms. Rodriguez's affidavit, correct?
Yes, I reviewed it.
And through this affidavit, you learned that Ms. Rodriguez actually had a sip of the wine, the same wine as Ms. Petrillo.
Yes.
She spit it out, but she still had this contact with the wine, correct?
She spit it out, which means she did not ingest it. But if you're asking, yes, I am aware she did sip it.
She had contact with that wine, correct?
Yes, but she did not digest it or ingest it.
Thank you, doctor. Finally, Dr. Kwan, you ordered test results to be run on Ms. Petrillo's blood, correct?
That's correct.
And in these test results, you were looking for indicators of something called acetylcholinesterase.
Mm-hmm.
Low levels of this indicate pesticide poisoning.
Yes, that's correct.
And Dr. Kwon, you're actually a member of the board of directors of Doctors for Organic Solutions. Is that right?
Yes, I am a member.
You are, this is an organization that advocates against the use of chemical pesticides.
Yes.
And you ultimately determined Ms. Petrio's cause of death to be respiratory failure as a result of pesticide poisoning.
Yes, that's correct.
And you made this determination before you received any of the test results that you ordered.
Yes, because her signs and symptoms matched up with someone that had been organophosphate poisoned.
Yes, but this again was before you received those documents.
Yes, I am an expert witness and I specialize in toxicology. So yes, I think I can make that assumption.
I pass the witness, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be allowed to step down.
Yes. Okay. Plaintiff, do you have another witness?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff calls Angel Rodriguez to the stand.
Okay.
Yes.
Ms. Rodriguez, you have been pre-sworn. Go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Good morning, Ms. Rodriguez.
Good morning.
Would you start by please introducing yourself to the court?
Hello, my name is Angel Rodriguez.
And how are you involved in today's case?
I mean, how wasn't I involved in this case? My two best friends, Genesis Petrillo and Casey Soto, were supposed to get married, and I was by their sides through it all.
And when did you first meet Ms. Soto and Ms. Petrillo?
We first met during the summer of 2016 at a trivia night through a mutual friend of ours, and a few drinks in, we all just hit it off.
And how would you describe your relationship with them?
We just clicked, you know? They'd been dating years before I met them, and they never made me feel left out, though, and we were always all together.
Ms. Rodriguez, what did Genesis Petrillo mean to you?
Genesis was my best friend. She was my ride or die, and losing her was one of the most heartbreaking moments of my life.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, I'd like to talk a little bit more about Ms. Petrillo, more specifically her wedding plans. Now, how are things going regarding the planning of the wedding by January of 2019?
Not great. By then, there were constant arguments between Casey, Harper, and Genesis, and it became hard to tell who was disagreeing with who.
And what were these arguments about?
From what I observed, Harper didn't seem to like Genesis very much, and it made things really tense between the three of them.
And from what you observed, did Mr. Martini seem to get along with Ms. Petrillo?
No, I wouldn't say so. Harper always seemed to be criticizing and insulting Genesis.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, I'd like for us to talk about the day of the wedding rehearsal on June 7th. How did that start out?
It was pretty bad. Genesis and Harper just kept fighting about everything.
And what did you notice about this fighting?
Well, at one point, Harper said that Genesis should just leave and save their family the headache. Otherwise, he'd make her disappear.
And how did Ms. Petrillo respond to that statement?
Objection, Your Honor.
What's your objection?
Sorry, I was objecting to the last question. It just cut out. So I'm objecting to improper character evidence to the statement that she will just make him disappear because they're using this testimony to show action and conformity therewith.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
Under MRE 404B2, this act goes to prove Mr. Martini's intent to cause harm to Ms. Petrillo, and therefore it is admissible. And further, under 405B, this intent to harm is an essential element to battery.
Okay, what was the question and the answer? I'm sorry.
Ms. Rodriguez, I asked you how Ms. Petrillo responded to Mr. Martini's statement.
And at one point, Harper said that Genesis should just leave and save their family the headache. Otherwise, that he'd make her disappear.
Now, how did Miss Petrillo appear after this?
What? No, hold on. I haven't ruled on your objection. I'm just trying to ask what the.
I apologize, Your Honor.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Okay. Okay, I'm having trouble following a little bit. So your question again, just your question.
Yes, it was, how did Miss Petrillo respond?
And tell me, Ms. Lualu, tell me what the witness's answer was.
That I believe Miss Petrillo was startled and told her something that Mr. Martini had said. I believe that was Miss Rodriguez's response.
Okay. I'll overrule the objection. Sorry it took so long.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, you were saying, how did Miss Petrillo respond or appear after this interaction between Mr. Martini?
Well, it seemed like she was really scared of Harper after seeing her being confronted like that. I mean, Harper yanked Genesis' arm and forced her into the hallway.
And did you speak with Miss Petrillo after this interaction?
Yeah, Genesis just warned me and said to keep away from Harper and that she was afraid that Harper was going to kill her if she wasn't careful.
I think there's an objection. Go ahead, counsel. Don't be afraid to interrupt.
Sorry, to hearsay to the statements of Genesis Petrillo.
May I respond? Under 8032, excited utterance is a statement that is made relating to a startling event, and that is also made while the declarant is under the stress, and therefore it is an exception to hearsay. And that stress being that we already established that Miss Petrillo was scared of Mr. Martini, and this is excited utterance for that reason.
Permission to respond?
Yes.
It is not excited utterance, as it wasn't a statement made to Harper Martini in the moment. Rather, it was after and at a different situation.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
The plaintiff still contends that Miss Petrillo's statement was made under the stress that she observed or that she felt during this interaction with Mr. Martini, whether that be that it was in the exact moment she was still under the stress that the interaction caused her.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, did anything else notable happen after the rehearsal dinner?
Yeah, I saw Harper in the hallway walking towards the kitchen with a canister that said pesticide on it. I was like, what was going on? And he said that it's for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest.
Objection, Your Honor, again to improper character evidence under Rule 404. I would also like to object to Rule 403, more prejudicial than probative. This statement, once again, is showing that it's action in conformity with.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
Under 404B2, this act goes to prove Mr. Martini's intent to cause harm to Ms. Petrillo. And furthermore, this probative value of this statement is far more probative than prejudicial, as it contains significant context for the jury to understand the relationship between Mr. Martini and Ms. Petrillo.
Permission to respond?
Yes, go ahead.
I think that the statement is extremely more prejudicial than probative, and I still stand by my objection that they are using it to show action in conformity therewith of just prior bad acts.
Mayor. Ms. Mills, what are the prior bad acts that you're talking about? So far, we have statements.
Really, just to the statement of saying things like it's Genesis pesticide. So that's why.
I'm going to overrule the objection. You can answer.
Ms. Rodriguez, do you need me to repeat the question?
Sure.
I asked you if anything else notable happened before the rehearsal dinner.
Yeah, like I said, Harper was walking towards the kitchen with a canister that said pesticide on it. And I was like, what was going on? And he said that it's for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, I'd like for us to move on to the dinner. How did that go?
So Harper had made a toast in front of everyone, but honestly, I wouldn't even call it a toast because Harper literally mocked Genesis throughout the whole thing.
What do you mean by Mr. Martini mocked Genesis throughout the whole thing?
Harper kept referring to Genesis as a problem child. It got less funny each time he said it.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, what was Ms. Petrillo's behavior like this night?
Well, strange, honestly. I was surprised by how little Genesis seemed to be drinking, even though she was getting married the next day.
And after you noticed that Ms. Petrillo wasn't drinking very much, what happened next?
So a little later on in the night, Harper toasted Genesis again, but this time He was nicer towards Genesis and even gifted her a fancy bottle of Cara wine from Peony Estates.
Now, did anyone else in the wedding party receive a bottle like this?
No, we all got Horizon bottles. That Cara wine bottle was for Genesis and Genesis only.
And who drank from this particular bottle of wine?
Well, I took a sip, but I spit out right away because it was disgusting. And other than that, I didn't see anybody besides Genesis drink out of the bottle.
Now, did you notice anything after you saw Miss Petrillo drinking this wine?
Yeah, she wasn't acting normally when she got up to dance.
Did you check on her at this time?
Yeah, I asked her if she was feeling okay, and she said this wasn't a feeling she's ever felt before, but she still insisted on staying with her guests before they went to bed.
Now, when the guests came, did you notice anything in particular about Miss Petrillo?
Yeah, eventually I noticed that she was slumped over and snoring. I figured that she just needed some rest, so as her best friend, of course, I took her up to her room.
After you brought her up to her room, did you take care of her?
Yeah, but at that point, she started throwing up. She was sweating. Her skin was flush, and every time she'd take a sip of water, she'd immediately throw it back up. And I've never seen her like this before.
Did her condition get any better?
Absolutely not. Genesis got worse and worse. Before I knew it, I was calling 911 after she passed out on the bathroom floor. I was just terrified for her. I just wanted her to be okay.
Ms. Rodriguez, can you walk me through what happened in the following moments?
Well, the EMT showed up and eventually wheeled Genesis onto the ambulance. I was with her the entire way, and it was just a nightmare.
Now, what was the condition of Miss Petrillo after you arrived at the hospital?
It wasn't good. Part of me was hoping that everything would be fine in time for the wedding, but when I was informed that Genesis had slipped into a coma, likely due to some kind of poisoning,
Objection, Your
I
Honor.
knew that wasn't going to happen.
Objection to the statement by the doctor of likely due to some sort of poisoning.
May I respond, Your Honor?
What is the objection?
Oh, hearsay, Your Honor.
Okay, response.
Your Honor, under Rule 803(1), hearsay is admissible when the declarant is talking about something that they observed while they were observing it. In this instance, Ms. Petrillo's doctor's statement that Genesis had slipped into a coma, likely due to some kind of poisoning, was made while they observed Ms. Petrillo's condition and is therefore an exception to hearsay.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I'm going to sustain the objection. Sorry, I'm going to sustain the objection.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, after you were at the hospital, what did you do next?
Well, I knew I had to go find Casey immediately, so I got a ride back to Peony Estates, and then I ran into Harper in the hallway on my way to Casey's room.
Now, what was your interaction like with Mr. Martini at this time?
Well, it was a little strange, honestly. Before I could say anything, Harper said, Genesis got poisoned. Oh no, we'll have to tell Casey. Casey needs to know.
Now, had you mentioned anything about Miss Petrillo's condition to Mr. Martini throughout this interaction?
I hadn't said anything about Genesis' condition, much as mentioned anything about poison.
Now, Ms. Rodriguez, what happened after your conversation with Mr. Martini?
I got to Casey's room, and she was already dressed for the wedding. It was just heart-shattering, and then Casey and I rushed over to the hospital to see Genesis immediately, of course. And as messed up as it sounds, Harper didn't even offer to come.
Ms. Rodriguez, when did you learn of Genesis Petrillo's death?
Around 9:30 a.m. or so. I just felt Casey's world crumble, and a piece of me died that morning too.
I'm very sorry, Ms. Rodriguez. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Ms. Rodriguez. I'd like to begin with your relationship with Mrs. Petrillo. It's true that you, Casey, and Genesis became friends over drinks, correct?
Yeah, it was a trivia night. It was really fun.
And you'd agree that from time to time, Genesis was known to be or drink quite heavily?
Yeah, whenever we celebrated every now and then, she was drinking.
And on the night of June 7th, you saw Miss Martini or Mr. Martini gift Genesis a bottle of the Cara wine.
Yeah, it was a complete pivot from what she was saying earlier about her.
Yes, but you You saw Genesis drink several glasses of this wine in a very short period of time, specifically only 45 minutes.
Yeah, I did see her drinking some glasses of wine from the Care wine bottle she got from Harper.
And Miss Petrillo actually offered a glass of this wine to everyone at the table, yes?
Yes, she did, but everybody declined.
But she even offered it to Casey.
Well, since we're on the table, sure, yeah.
And Mr. Martini not once stopped in to stop Genesis from offering this wine, correct?
Well, yes, but Harper, I doubt she even heard us.
But that's a yes to my question. Mr. Martini never stopped Genesis from offering the wine to anyone else, including his daughter.
Yes, like I said, I just doubt that he heard, my bad.
And you actually did have a sip of this wine, right?
Yeah, I spit it out because it was just disgusting.
But you didn't feel sick at any point in that night or the next day?
No, I did not.
And to go, excuse me, isn't it true that you lost track of your own drink consumption before Miss Petrillo even started drinking the wine that night?
Well, yeah, I just, I don't tally my drinks, but yeah, I didn't have count.
But so it's true that you don't know how much you drank nor Genesis Petrillo on that night?
No, and I didn't really know Genesis amount she had to drink either, but I couldn't really see her drinking up until one point of the evening, and she only had like one drink.
And before you called 911 that night, it's true that Miss Petrillo had started vomiting and sweating profusely.
Yeah, she was vomiting and sweating, and she was just in a terrible condition. I'd never seen her like that.
And this isn't the first time. Well, you have actually seen Miss Petrillo vomiting and sweating from alcohol before, right?
Well, I've seen her vomit before, but I never seen her vomit and sweat and vomit after just drinking one sip of water.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that my witness be allowed to step down at this time.
You may. Plaintiff, do you have another witness?
No, Your Honor. At this time, the plaintiff rests its case in chief.
Okay, so we're going to take a 5-minute break now. I have 11:34. We'll come back, I'm almost 11:35. We'll come back at 11:40. And just remember that we're being publicly broadcast on YouTube. So I'll see you guys shortly. All right, are we all back?
The defense is ready to proceed.
Okay, plaintiff.
Yes, Your Honor, the plaintiff is ready to proceed as well.
Okay, defense, are you ready for your case in chief?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
The defense calls Harper Martini to the stand. Good afternoon. Can you please state your name for the court?
Yeah, it's Harper Martini, kind of like the cocktail. It's
What do
kind
you
of
do?
ironic for this trial.
Sorry, excuse me. What do you do for a living, Mr. Martini?
Sorry about that. I own a winery here in Rapid River Valley called Peony Estates.
Have you always worked in the wine business?
Well, I used to work at a few other wineries. I worked at this place called Cumberland Farms, and then I took a break to raise my daughter, Casey. And then I went to work for this guy, Danny, at Rosie and Pedro at another winery. And then I finally just got the ambition and said, why not? And opened my own winery in 2015. It was great, but it wasn't always smooth sailing, if I have to be honest.
What do you mean by it hasn't always been smooth sailing?
Well, when I first owned a winery, I began to realize that the wine business is very cutthroat. So we had to do whatever we could to make profits. And Casey actually gave me this great idea for a bed and breakfast aspect that we could put into Peony Estates. And that put us on the map. We were booked 2 years in advance before, unfortunately, the accident in today's case.
Having been in this business for so long, are you aware of the contents typically found in wine?
Of course, it's not my first rodeo.
At this time, I will display pre-admitted Exhibit 9.
Go ahead. Wait,
Yeah.
Sorry, what did you say?
Oh, I was just getting ready to display pre-admitted Exhibit.
Okay.
Sorry. Mr. Martini, what am I showing you?
I believe that is an analysis of one of our wine casks.
Why is it that there, or can you explain to me the excuse me, I'm sorry, the bolded results?
Sure thing. So as you can see, we have some contaminants in our wine. This is perfectly normal for a winery. You see, we're not an organic winery, so we do use chemical pesticides and other things of that nature. So levels of contaminants are normal in any amount of wine. Any winery owner will tell you this. It's just standard procedure, really.
Your Honor, speculation.
Response, Your Honor?
Actually, plaintiff, what do you mean speculation? If you can explain.
Mr. Martini is not a FDA regulator of any sort, and therefore he is simply speculating that toxins are found in everything.
Response.
A response? Yeah.
He is not speculating. He's been in this business, as he testified, for over 20 years, having had many lab results come to him. He's very aware of what contents it would have and the acceptable levels according to the FDA.
Yeah, I'll overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Mr. Martini, why is it that there was a high level of pesticide in this result?
Well, like I said, we're not an organic winery, so we do use chemical pesticides and that sort of stuff around our winery. So whenever you take a test result of any wine that isn't from an organic winery, there's going to be some level of contaminants that's perfectly safe and perfectly normal.
Now, moving on to your relationship with your daughter, Casey, were you two close?
Of course. Casey's my little girl. She's the most important thing in my life.
And besides your daughter, is there anything else in your life that holds significance?
Well, I always joked around with Casey that Peony Estates was my second baby. She used to joke with me that sometimes I nurtured the wine more than her, but of course that's not true.
You mentioned actually that Casey gave you the idea for the bed and breakfast. Did Casey have a role in the business?
Oh, of course. Casey had winemaking in her veins. She basically had wine running through her blood. She's come up with names for various wines, workshopped our website, all that kind of stuff. And she was so involved in the process.
What do you mean by that? Oh, excuse me.
Until, of course, Genesis came into the picture.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Casey met this girl, Genesis, and they began dating. And once they did, Casey really could never say no to Genesis. So Casey began getting less involved with the business from that point.
Could you describe your relationship with Genesis?
Well, as we've heard throughout the entire trial, I'm sure it's no secret that Genesis and I didn't get along that well. We equally disliked each other, but we did have one thing in common that I'm pretty proud to say. And of course, that was our love for Casey.
Why didn't you get along with Genesis?
She was always making me snide remarks, always talked bad about Peony Estates and myself, and Genesis was just a troublemaker.
Objection, Your Honor.
What-
Character evidence.
Permission to respond.
Yes.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 405, he is not using this to give a specific trait. He's rather testifying to the reputation of Genesis Petrillo based on his relationship with Ms. Petrillo.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yes.
I do believe that defense is offering this problem child character trait of Ms. Petrillo to prove that Ms. Petrillo did conform to this particular trait.
Permission to respond.
Yes.
It's not necessarily that Ms. Petrillo was a problem child. We're not offering it for the truth of it, rather just how or the reputation Mr. Martini had or Ms. Petrillo had, according to Mr. Martini.
I'm gonna overrule the objection.
So what did you mean by troublemaker?
Well, like I said before, Casey could not tell Genesis no. I mean, I remember this one instance where Genesis made some stupid bet with Casey about drinking, and it got Casey sent to the hospital with alcohol poisoning.
Counsel, you're muted.
Oh, thank you. Did you ever express any of these concerns to Casey?
I tried to twice. The first was right after Casey brought Genesis home, and I just made it clear that Casey should think independently about what Casey wants. The second was when they told me they were engaged, and I asked if Casey was absolutely sure that she wanted to spend the rest of her life with Genesis. She said yes, so I tried to extend an olive branch per se and try to make a peace with Genesis.
How did you try to make peace?
Well, I tried to. It wasn't easy, but Genesis just kept dividing me and Casey further away from each other. So I decided I would host an engagement party for her at Peony Estates, but while she was there, she actually asked Casey, really, you want to start our life in this pretentious little glass box? Talking about my...
What was your objection? Sorry.
Hearsay.
Permission to respond.
Counsel, can you explain, plaintiff's counsel, if you can explain what your objection is to hearsay? What are you objecting to?
I believe these statements that Mr. Martini said, Ms. Petrillo said, are out-of-court statements used for the truth of the matter asserted.
What statement?
I'm sorry, excuse me.
No, you're good. You're good.
Mr. Martini was saying that Ms. Petrillo was saying that, do you really want to have our wedding at this pretentious?
Okay. Response.
Yes. So as it is a question, there is no truth value, and we are not offering it for the truth. We're offering it for the effect on the listener.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Plaintiff still contends that these statements are being offered for the truth of the matter asserted, being that Ms. Petrillo did not like Peony Estates, and therefore it is hearsay.
Permission to respond.
Is there anything else you can rely on that it's not hearsay?
For my response,
Yes.
I mean, I could also say it goes to the existing state of mind, but I do stand by my prior response that a question does not have any truth value.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Yeah.
I don't believe it was a question. It was, but she was offering prejudicial comments about, do you really want to have our wedding at this I don't believe the exact statement, but it was hearsay because it was an out-of-court statement made for the truth of the matter asserted.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Sorry.
I was muted again. I'm sorry. After initially trying to make peace, did you do anything else?
Yeah, I tried to set up a lunch with Genesis, but Genesis kept putting it off and rescheduling. No surprise there.
Did you eventually have that lunch with Genesis?
Well, we were finally able to meet for lunch. I told her that Casey had told me about how she wanted to move the wedding to Peony Estates, and Genesis looked shocked by that. She then even said, "Is this about the move?" I had no idea what she meant at the time, but I later came to find out that she was planning on moving to Paris and taking Casey with her.
I'd like to actually speak more about the wedding now. Can you describe to me how the wedding planning went?
Thank God, it was a nightmare. Genesis had to be in control of everything, despite me hiring a wedding planner, but we made it work. From that point on, it was really just emotional complications.
What do you mean by that?
Well, Casey was in love with Genesis. And of course, her father and her fiance disagreeing quite a bit put some stress on Casey. So I promised Casey that I would try to make amends between the two of us.
Did you follow through on that promise to Casey?
I would say so. I had a good peace plan in mind that I was sure would help.
Can you explain to me what that plan was?
Well, at Peony Estates, we had this 2019 Caroline. It was a beautiful blend. Casey was actually the one that came up with the name. But regardless, I decided to bottle that wine about a month or so before the wedding to give to Genesis.
Would you recognize that bottle in court today?
Yes, I would.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm going to display pre-admitted exhibits 2A and 2B.
Okay.
Is this the bottle you were referring to?
Yes, 2A is the bottle, 2B is the label that was originally on it. The reason it's not on it anymore is because I ripped it off.
And when did you present this bottle to Genesis?
That was at the rehearsal dinner, which was June 7th. I believe, I want to say it was around 10 p.m. when I gave a toast.
You mentioned that you ripped off this label. When did you do that?
Well, around 2:30 a.m. It was early in the morning, so forgive me, but I got a phone call from one of my employees, Austin Lewis, said something about someone being in the hospital. So I immediately ran to Genesis's room.
What
was your objection?
Hearsay
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yes, Your Honor. To Mr. Lewis's statements regarding that someone was in the hospital, it is an out-of-court statement made for the truth of the matter asserted in this case.
Response.
Yes. We're not offering it for the truth of the matter, rather just the effect on the listener, because Mr. Martini, because of what he heard, went up to Genesis or Miss Petrio's room to look to see if she was there.
Your Honor, if I may respond?
Yes.
Plaintiff still contends that it is hearsay due to the truth value being offered, that someone was in the hospital and then going to prove the subsequent actions of Mr. Martini.
Is it disputed that someone was in the hospital?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
I'll overrule the objection.
So, Mr. Martini, you mentioned going up to Mrs. Petrio's room. What happened then?
Well, when I got there, I noticed this empty bottle on the floor. I nearly tripped over it. So I just thought it was trash. So I picked it up, realized it was the Caroline, and then I ripped off the label because I knew it wasn't released to the public yet, and I just didn't want it getting out. So I ripped off the label, threw it in the trash, and that was that.
Why did you throw the bottle away?
Well, like I said, I just thought it was trash. So I just really didn't want someone else to trip over it like I almost had.
And Mr. Martini, I have one final question. I'm sorry, I don't. Did you poison Genesis Petrio?
No, of course not. First of all, I'm just not that kind of a person. And B, it just doesn't make sense what the plaintiff is accusing me of.
And why do you say that?
Well, let's think about it for a second. I decide that I absolutely hate my daughter's soon-to-be bride. So my plan is to take this bottle of wine that I supposedly poisoned and present it to her in front of 100-something people. I then hope and hope and hope that Genesis is the sole person to drink from this wine, even though there's the possibility that she could have shared it with my own daughter. I mean, come on. I wouldn't risk poisoning my own daughter. It just doesn't make sense. On top of that, it would hurt business at Peony Estates.
Objection argumentative.
Permission.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I don't think that's a legal objection, counsel.
And at this time, I have no further questions, so I pass the witness.
Okay, cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Mr. Martini.
Good
Now,
morning.
why don't we begin by talking about your business, Peony Estates? Now, you
Okay.
first opened Peony Estates in 2015, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, it was your wish that your daughter, Casey, would one day take over Peony Estates, isn't that right?
Of course, she was such a great winemaker, so of course I would hope that for her.
Now, moving on to your first encounters with Miss Petrillo, your daughter, Casey, first brought Miss Petrillo to Peony Estates in 2015. That is correct, right?
Yes, I believe so.
And at this time, you were able to interact with Miss Petrillo, isn't that right?
Yes.
Now, during your interactions, Miss Petrillo made insulting comments about your business, didn't she?
Yeah, it was pretty brutal stuff.
In addition, these comments upset you, didn't they?
Objection, Your Honor, to the comments by Genesis Petrillo. Those are hearsay.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
We are not using these comments to prove their truth value, that truth value being that Miss Petrillo disliked Peony Estates. Rather, we are using Miss Petrillo's comments about Peony Estates merely to establish the relationship between the two, being Mr. Martini and Miss Petrillo, and furthermore, to provide background information to the jury about the opposing parties in this case.
Permission to respond?
Yes, briefly.
Yeah, I stand by my objection of hearsay, as they are not offering it as any exception to the rule of hearsay. They are just, so regardless of its context, it's still hearsay.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Very, very briefly, yes.
I still contend that this is not hearsay. We're not offering these statements for their truth value, merely to provide context for the relationship between Mr. Martini and Miss Petrillo.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Martini, you heard your daughter, Casey, testify in court today that Miss Petrillo referred to your wine as cheap, didn't you?
Unfortunately, yes.
Now, this upset you, didn't it?
I mean, of course, it would upset any winery owner.
Now, Mr. Martini, you began to see Miss Petrillo as a threat to the business that you hoped to pass on to your daughter one day, didn't you?
Yeah, she was taking Casey away from it.
Moreover, Mr. Martini, you thought that your business, Peony Estates, would be better off if Miss Petrillo were somehow out of the picture. Isn't that correct?
I mean, yeah, just move away and leave Casey.
Now, Mr. Martini, I'd like to move on to some of your further interactions with Miss Petrillo. Now, you threw an engagement party for your daughter, Casey, and Miss Petrillo in 2018. Isn't that right?
Yes, that's true.
Now, during this engagement party, Miss Petrillo was trying to convince your daughter, Casey, to have the wedding at Rosie and Pedro rather than Peony Estates. Isn't that correct?
Yes, she was.
Now, when you heard this, you, in your own words, had never been angrier in your life. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I mean, it was upsetting. I wanted my daughter to have the wedding at mine, and Rosie and Pedro just isn't as good as my winery.
Right. And after this, you scheduled a lunch with Miss Petrillo to clear the air. Isn't that correct?
Of course, I wanted to do anything I could for Casey to make any amends.
And at that lunch, you found out that your daughter, Casey, and Miss Petrillo would be moving to Paris. Isn't that right?
Yeah.
And after discovering this, you wanted to stop the wedding between Miss Petrillo and your daughter, Casey. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, I did.
Now, more specifically, you wanted to stop this wedding because Casey would not be able to take over Peony Estates in Paris. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I guess I'm just kind of an overprotective dad in that sense.
Right. Mr. Martini, you believed Miss Petrillo to be the biggest mistake in your daughter, Casey's life. Isn't that correct?
I mean, yes.
Now, Mr. Martini, I'd like to talk about some further interactions with Miss Petrillo about a month prior to the wedding. Now, you wrote a letter to Miss Petrillo, isn't that correct?
I did, yeah.
And you would recognize a copy of that letter if I showed it to you in court today? Your Honor, permission to screen share Exhibit 24, given that it is out of the view of the jury.
Go ahead.
Mr. Ongi, can we get a copy of Exhibit 24 on the screen, please? Now, Mr. Martini, you did write this letter to Miss Petrillo, isn't that correct?
Yes, I did.
And this is a true and correct copy of that letter as you last saw it, right?
Yes.
Hasn't been changed or altered in any way?
Not that I can tell.
Your Honor, at this time, the plaintiff offers Exhibit 24 into evidence.
Response?
Yes, I would like to object to more Rule 403, more prejudicial than probative. The content of this letter are substantially more prejudicial than they are probative to today's case.
Your Honor, may I respond?
How so, counsel?
If I may proffer, they're going to go into a situation that happened before the night of the wedding in which the defendant made a decision to, to pay off Genesis to leave. And so just because he did that does not, that is substantially prejudicial to today's argument.
Your Honor, may I respond? Under 403, this probative value of this letter significantly outweighs any prejudicial bias it may have to the jury. Now, that probative value being that it provides significant context to the relationship between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo, and it gives insight to the events leading up to the wedding. And therefore, this is extremely pertinent for the jury to understand, and it outweighs any prejudicial bias that it may have to the jury.
I'll overrule the objection and admit Petitioner's Exhibit 24.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Mr. Martini, you did write this letter to Ms. Petrillo, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
And you wrote it specifically to her that you needed her out of your life, yes?
Yeah, so I wrote this note as to see kind of a test to see what kind of person Genesis was, so that way I would be able to warn Casey if, you know, she did take the money and leave, I'd be able to know. And if she didn't, then I knew she was in it for the right reasons.
Yes, Mr. Martini, so much so that you offered Ms. Petrillo $300,000 to get her out of the picture, didn't you?
Not only that, she took it.
But you did offer it to her, Mr. Martini, just to be clear.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so you specifically stated in this letter that you would take Ms. Petrillo out the hard way if she did not comply with your request. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, but that was just me writing in the moment.
But you did write it, Mr. Martini, just to clarify. And just to be clear, Ms. Petrillo did not comply with your request, did she?
Well, she took the money, but no, she did not leave Casey.
Right. Now, Mr. Martini, let's move on to the day of the wedding rehearsal on June 7th. You heard Angel Rodriguez testify in court today that she saw you walking from the kitchen with a can of pesticide. Isn't that correct?
Yes, I believe so.
And that very same kitchen was the kitchen that the Cara wine bottle was being stored, yes?
As I can recall, yes.
And that very same bottle of Cara wine was found to have pesticides in it, yes?
Yeah, I believe so.
Now, you heard it said in court today that in Ms. Petrillo's system, it was found to have pesticides in it the day that she died, correct?
Yes, I believe the doctor said something about that.
Furthermore, Mr. Martini, the Petrillo family is accusing you of having caused their daughter's death. Isn't that right?
Yes, I think that's why we're here today.
Mr. Martini, you have even said on the day of the wedding rehearsal that you wanted nothing more than for Ms. Petrillo to be gone, haven't you?
Yeah, but I didn't mean dead.
But you said gone, Mr. Martini, isn't that correct?
Yeah, as in leaving Casey and moving away.
Mr. Martini, you have even gone so far as to say that you are relieved, happy even, that Ms. Petrillo is out of your life. Isn't that correct?
I mean, I'm not going to lie. I kind of am. I mean, she was a bad influence on Casey. And I mean, come on, if I really did this, do you think I would admit that?
Mr. Martini, just to clarify, you did say that you were relieved and happy that she was out of your life, yes?
I mean, yeah.
No further questions, Your Honor.
I have no redirect. I just ask that the witness may be excused.
May be excused. Defense, call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Blair Osborne to the stand.
Okay. Mr. Osborne, you've been pre-sworn.
May I proceed?
Yes.
Would you please introduce yourself to the court?
Hello, I'm Blair Osborne.
And what do you do for a living, Mr. Osborne?
Well, I'm a private event planner for Rabbit River Valley, and the best private event planner in my opinion. But I'm also the founder and owner of my own event planning business, Bliss by Blair.
And how many years have you owned Bliss by Blair Events?
Since 2011.
And can you describe the types of events your company typically plans?
Well, at Bliss by Blair, we can do any event you want us to do, but if you really want to get the Blair Osborne experience, you're going to ask us to plan your wedding.
Now, I'd like to focus more on the reason why you're here today. Mr. Osborne, how are you connected to this case?
Well, of course, I was hired by Harper Martini to plan the wedding of Genesis and Casey, but I was also at Peony Estates the night that Genesis became sick and ultimately passed away later.
I'd like to focus more on your history with Harper Martini and Peony Estates. How did your company, Bliss by Blair Events, come to work with the winery?
Well, back in 2015, I was still a new event planner, so I accidentally double booked a birthday and a wedding reception. But thankfully, Harper and Peony Estates had offered their venue for me as an alternate option. So ever since then, the rest is history.
And have you worked with Harper Martini or Peony Estates since then?
Oh, of course. We've done about 80 plus events from 2015 to 2019.
And how was your experience while working with them?
Nothing but good things. I've gotten quite close to Harper and the staff over the years, and both the staff and Harper have been diligent to my clients, to my guests, and they're always professional.
Now, in regards to today's accusations against Harper Martini, were you concerned about the reputation of your business?
Oh, no, I didn't feel concerned about my reputation for my business or at the time when I was working with them. Like I said before, I'm not going to risk my professional reputation by repeatedly bringing my clients to a venue I don't trust.
Now, I'd like to direct your attention to the date of the actual rehearsal dinner on June 7th, 2019. Could you tell me about the interactions between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo that afternoon?
Yes, I believe as soon as Genesis showed up, Harper and Genesis started bickering with each other as usual.
And did this bickering continue until the evening?
Oh, definitely did.
And did anything else happen between Harper Martini and Genesis Petrillo that day, or that evening, excuse me?
Yes, although they were bickering most of the time, during dessert, I know Harper felt like smoothing things over. So Harper presented this beautiful bottle of wine to Genesis. It was just so sweet.
And after receiving this bottle of wine from Mr. Martini, did Genesis open it?
Oh yeah, from my memory, I definitely remember Genesis popping that bottle open immediately, and I saw her pouring drinks of it. I saw her drinking it. I see her pouring more drinks of it. So yeah, she definitely opened that thing up quick.
And what other alcohol was available to the wedding party at this dinner?
Yes, so after that wine bottle, the wedding party also received a gift from Peony Estates and Harper, and we also had an open bar and a cocktail station.
And when was the last time that you saw Genesis Petrillo at the rehearsal dinner?
I'd like to say it was around midnight. Most of the guests had already gone to bed, so I was heading out, and I saw Genesis and Angel over by the cocktail station.
Would you be able to estimate how much alcohol that Genesis had consumed over the course of that night?
Well, I can't tell you like exactly how much they had to drink, but I can say that while talking with them, they would have kept me there for the rest of the night if they could.
And as the event planner, were you concerned that Miss Petrillo wasn't going to be ready for the wedding ceremony the next day?
I wasn't really worried or concerned when I left Genesis that night, but I did want to make sure that she drank some water before bed because, as the event planner, I have to make sure that people are manageable.
And after the rehearsal dinner, what time did you return to Peony Estates the following morning on June 8th, 2019?
I like to say it was around 6:30 a.m. because I wanted to start setting up for the wedding really early.
And after you began setting up for the wedding, what happened next?
I like to say it was about a little bit close to an hour later, maybe like 7:15ish. I had met with Harper and we went to go start waking up the wedding party.
And while waking up the wedding party, did Genesis answer that morning?
No, Genesis didn't.
Did you try to contact Genesis?
Yes, I called Genesis multiple times, and then I called Angel multiple times as well, but I didn't get a response from either one of them.
And when was the next time you saw Genesis Petrillo again that day?
For the rest of that day, I didn't see Genesis at all.
did anybody tell you why Genesis wasn't present?
Oh yes, I want to say it was 8:30. I don't know if that's the exact time, but I want to say 8:30. Angel came in and basically informed us that Genesis had fallen into a coma.
And what happened after you found out that Genesis had fallen into a coma? Excuse me.
Well, after hearing that news, I didn't really hear much else. I can't remember much else of what I heard, but I do remember Casey and Angel rushing off to the hospital, and then later Harper informed me that Genesis had passed away. So of course the wedding was canceled.
Based on your relationship with Harper Martini, do you believe that Mr. Martini would have harmed Genesis Petrillo?
No,
Objection
I mean,
to character.
Go
Character
ahead.
evidence.
I'm sorry.
Can you repeat your objection, counsel?
Yeah, Your Honor. Objection under Rule 404, character evidence.
Okay, can you give me an explanation?
Your Honor, if the witness was to answer that question, he would be referring to past character traits of Harper Martini. And under Rule 404, the witness cannot refer to past character traits that are inadmissible to prove that the person acted in accordance with that trait in the future.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Mhm.
Oh, yes. Your Honor, Mr. Mr. Osborne already established that he worked with Mr. Martini quite closely, and I believe that he is qualified to testify as to whether or not he believed that Mr. Martini would take any actions to harm Genesis Petrillo.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Even so, the witness answering that question would still be considered under character evidence under Rule 404. Even if he does have a close relationship with Harper Martini, he cannot say that this character trait would be determining the future actions of Mr. Martini.
Can you guys refresh my memory of what was the question?
The question I had asked was, based on the relationship with Harper Martini, do you believe that Mr. Martini would have harmed Genesis Petrillo?
Based off of whose relationship with Harper
Based
Martini?
off Mr. Osborne's relationship with Harper Martini. They've had a 5-year business relationship.
I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Osborne, after knowing Mr. Martini for so many years, can you describe him?
Yes, as I've said, Harper is always professional and very kind, and I know him mainly for loving Casey so much. So he's a great guy.
Thank you. I pass this witness, Your Honor.
Okay. Cross?
Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes.
Mr. Osborne, a couple of weeks prior to the wedding, you, Harper, and Casey met to discuss the decor options for the ceremony. Isn't that right?
Yes, the decor options.
During this conversation, Harper Martini pulled out a voicemail message and played it to you and Casey, correct?
Yeah, it was, I mean, because after it was like some awkward silence and Harper just pulled that voicemail out, it was like, why?
And after hearing that message, you heard Harper say, one day Genesis will drink the wrong thing and it will kill Genesis, didn't you?
I heard something along that lines, yes.
Now, I'd like to turn your attention to the wedding rehearsal on June 7th, 2019. You were present for that rehearsal, correct?
Oh yeah, of course. I'm an event planner.
And it was at that rehearsal that you noticed that things were tense between Harper and Genesis, weren't they?
Oh yeah, of course.
So much so that Casey Soto, the daughter of the defendant, told you to keep them as far away from each other as possible.
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of weird because I mean, I'm a wedding planner. I'm not Dr.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay to the statements of Casey Soto to Blair Osborne. Excuse me.
Response?
Your Honor, the statement is not offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
What is it being offered for?
Your Honor, in fact, it's not a fact itself. It's merely a command. Therefore, it is not hearsay.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
It's still an out-of-court statement that is being offered, so it would still be considered hearsay.
I'll sustain the objection.
Later that evening at the rehearsal dinner, Harper and Genesis were insulting each other again. Isn't that right?
I believe they were bickering between the two of them.
Yet during dessert, you saw Harper Martini offer Genesis a bottle of wine, didn't you?
Yeah, Harper wanted to smooth things over. I mean, they were arguing earlier. Harper just wanted to make things better.
Mr. Martini specifically said when offering the wine, don't open it in front of other people, right?
Yeah, it was a gift to Genesis.
Moreover, the defendant said that he wanted Genesis to drink the bottle when she had a moment to reflect on everything she had did, didn't she?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was a gift to Genesis the night before rehearsal. Just think about how far you've come in life.
But you even thought the comments by Mr. Martini made while gifting the bottle were odd, didn't you?
Yeah, it was a little odd.
Now let's talk about the morning after the wedding rehearsal. On the following morning, Angel told everyone how Genesis had been poisoned, right?
Yeah, that was Angel.
Moreover, when the defendant was told that Genesis had died, he did not say anything in response, did he?
I didn't hear anything after Angel said that, so I'm not sure.
In fact, not once did you hear the defendant express grief about Genesis' death, did you?
Objection, Your Honor. Improper character evidence.
Can you explain, counsel?
Yes, the Mr. Opposing counsel is trying to use these statements to show action and conformity therewith, trying to state that Harper Martini acted in conformity with with not showing any signs of grief in regards to Genesis's passing.
I'm going to overrule the objection. He can answer.
Mr. Osborne, in fact, not once did you hear the defendant express grief about Genesis' death, did you?
Yes, and as I said, I didn't hear much after Angel broke the news to everyone.
Was that a yes or a no, Mr. Osborne?
Yes, after Angel broke the news, I didn't hear much, so I didn't hear anything from Harper.
Thank you, Mr. Osborne. No further questions, Your Honor.
Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor. I just ask that my witness be excused.
Okay, you are excused. Defense, call your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Dr. Cannon to the stand.
Okay, Dr. Cannon, you have been pre-sworn. You can go ahead.
Can you please introduce yourself to the court?
Yes, my name is Dr. Rosa Kangan.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
For sure. I went to Ohio State University, where I graduated with a Bachelor of Science. From there, I went to Harvard Medical School, where I got an emphasis on my degree in toxicology.
And what did you do after you graduated?
After graduation, I wanted to move to the big city, so I ended up teaching at Massachusetts General Hospital for a couple years. Eventually, I got tired of that, became a professor, and now I'm a consultant.
What do you do as a consultant?
I work as a consultant by reviewing different companies, either from pesticide to cosmetology products with their toxicology, and I work at gardening consulting.
What sorts of clients do you work for?
As I said, I work for usually pesticides, cosmetology, anything that has to do with chemistry, basically. Our biggest client is Dusky Roach and Rodent Killer.
What's your relationship like with Detsky?
It's pretty good. Me and we work along each other. I gotta say it's pretty good.
And have you ever testified in court before?
I have. I have for 35 in total.
And are you being paid for your services today?
Yes, I'm getting paid a flat fee of $50,000.
Is that a normal amount?
Yes, just depending on different types of things I have to do, but $50,000 is exactly the normal.
And did you receive any documents pertaining to today's case?
Yes, I received a few exhibits as well as Angel Rodriguez affidavit and especially the one that I'm overlooking, Dr. Kwan's report.
How did you?
What's your objection?
As to hearsay, I realize that this objection is preemptive, but if Dr. Cannon is to go into any statements of Angel Rodriguez's affidavit, it would be inadmissible hearsay.
Counsel, I cannot rule on a preemptive objection. You're going to have to object as we go. If you hear a statement that's hearsay or that's objectionable, you'll have to object then, but I can't rule on that now.
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
How did you review these documents, doctor?
I reviewed them. I usually, when I have a case like this, I do something called the 3 R's. I review, I look over the report as well, and then I record my findings.
And are documents like these commonly reviewed in your line of work?
Yes, usually an associate consultant gets limited documents, but we make sure to go through everything to find the best facts in the case to make the best conclusion.
What sorts of principles and methods did you use while reviewing today's case?
As I said, I use the 3 R's: review, report, and record. This is usually the same thing almost every associate consultant does.
And did you reliably apply them?
Yes, I did.
Did you prepare a report based on the documents you received?
Yes.
And do you believe that your testimony here today will help the jury understand the facts of today's case?
Yes.
After you completed your report, did you arrive at a conclusion?
I did.
Objection, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Under Rule 702, I do not believe that counsel has laid the sufficient foundation to qualify Dr. Cannon as an expert, specifically under 702D, that these have been reliably applied to the facts of today's case, because according to Davis v. Adams, counsel must establish these prongs through a preponderance of the evidence. A mere yes or no to the answer is not sufficient in order to fulfill prong 702D. Therefore, Dr. Cannon cannot testify as an expert.
May I respond?
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. These under Davis v. Adams and Tarrant readers, none of these qualifications are dispositive. I believe that we have shown all of these prongs to a preponderance of the evidence. The doctor testified to what sorts of principles and methods she used, that they're widely accepted in her field, that she reliably applied them. She's gone into depth of the sorts of principles and methods. She has been qualified as an expert in this court.
Your Honor, may I respond?
Briefly.
The piece of case law that opposing counsel just brought up is in reference to 702C. I am objecting under 702D that these facts have been reliably applied to the facts of today's case, and they have not laid that foundation.
Counsel, go ahead and lay the foundation.
Dr. Cannon, did you reliably apply your principles and methods today?
Yes, as I said, I did, especially with my 3 R's: report, record, and research.
Now, Dr. Cannon, after you completed your report, did you arrive at a conclusion?
Yes, I did.
What conclusion did you come to?
So I came to the conclusion that I do agree with Dr. Kwan's findings, but I think there is still doubt on the exact reason regarding Genesis Petrio's death.
Now, can you explain what the difference between the cause and mechanism of death is?
Yes. So for me, the mechanism of death is the physiological derangement that resulted in death. For example, in this case, it would be respiratory failure. But on the other hand, the cause of death is completely different. For an example, it's the injury or disease that led to death, which is, in this case, the organophosphate.
And can you explain to us what an organophosphate is?
Yes, I can. So an organophosphate is just a pesticide, or is a certain type of chemical that kills bugs. It's very harmful to humans.
And why is it that you disagreed with Dr. Kwan's findings regarding the cause of death?
I disagree with Dr. Kwan's findings because he ruled out so many conclusions and just went towards the organophosphate poisoning, yet Genesis Petrio was exhibiting signs of other things.
Can you explain what the conclusions that you came to were?
Yes, so I had 4. One of them is alcohol poisoning. The second was an allergic reaction to some sort of food or drink drank that day. And then the third, hepatic disease. And then obviously Dr. Kwan's findings, which was the organophosphate.
And can you explain why you thought it was hepatic disease? It could have been hepatic disease.
Yes, I can. So it could have been hepatic disease because Genesis Petrio had low ACE chlorotyrase, which I'm just going to call ACE for short here. And this, the liver breaks down alcohol, but since with hepatic disease, which is the chronic liver disease, the liver does not function properly and can lead to low acetylcholinesterase, as well as abdominal pain, which could cause nausea.
Now, doctor, I'd actually like to focus on your conclusion of alcohol poisoning. Why couldn't you rule that out?
I couldn't rule it out because Genesis Petrio had a BAC of 0.16 when arriving to the hospital. So her BAC could have been higher than it was seen at the hospital. It could have been even higher 0.30, which could cause life-threatening.
And for those of us who don't know, can you briefly explain what a BAC is?
A BAC is your blood alcohol content. This is usually the amount of alcohol a person has in their bloodstream, which could impair a person.
And when you were reviewing this case, do you remember referring to an alcohol impairment chart?
Yes, I did.
Your Honor, at this time, excuse me, would you be able to recognize that chart today, Dr. Cannon?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm going to display Exhibit 23 constructively out of the view of the jury.
Okay.
Dr. Cannon, what is it that you're seeing on the screen?
It's the Midland Center for Public Health alcohol impairment chart.
And are you familiar with this exhibit?
Yes.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No.
Is it a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it is.
Do you believe it'll be helpful in supporting your testimony here today?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, at this time, I move to enter Exhibit 23 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objections, Your Honor.
Well, this exhibit is admitted.
Now, Doctor, can you briefly explain why Ms. Petrio's BAC of 0.16 is important?
It's important because Janice Petrio was exhibiting signs from the high risk, which is the impairment of speech, as well as severe impairment as well from coordination, vomiting, which all align with Janice Petrio's symptoms. And even the most important part, the life-threatening portion of the chart, Janice Petrio had symptoms.
And what could this have meant for Ms. Petrio?
It could have meant that alcohol poisoning could have been the determining factor that caused the respiratory paralysis that evening.
At this time, Your Honor, I pass the witness.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning, Dr. Cannon. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Dr. Cannon, you work with several chemical pesticide companies, isn't that right?
I do.
One of those chemical pesticide companies being Detsky Roach and Rodent, isn't that right?
Yes.
And the CEO of Detsky Roach and Rodent Company told you that it is extremely important that you not find chemical pesticides as the cause of Miss Petrio's death unless you want to continue having business with him. Isn't that right?
Objection, Your Honor.
Yes, what's your
Yes, Your Honor. Objection and hearsay to the statements made by the CEO of Detsky.
May I respond, Your Honor?
Yes.
Your Honor, I am not offering these statements for their truth value. More specifically, whether the CEO would actually continue business with Dr. Cannon or not. I am merely showing it, offering it to show bias on the part of the witness.
Okay, so counsel, then you are offering it to show the truth of the matter asserted.
No, the truth value of the statement is, the statement was that you must not find chemical pesticides as the cause of death or I will not continue having business with you. So the truth value of that statement would be whether or not they would continue having a business relationship. And I am not offering it for that matter. I am offering it to show the bias of Dr. Cannon.
Response.
Yes, Your Honor. I would argue that they are offering it for the truth of the matter as it would go, Your Honor. They are offering it for the truth of the matter asserted as to whether this relationship would continue.
Your Honor.
I'll overrule the objection.
Now, Dr. Cannon, to be clear, the CEO told you that it is extremely important that you not find chemical pesticides as the cause of death, or he would not continue having business with you. Isn't that right?
Yes, but I'm finding all my findings in today's case are based on the facts, and I am associated with the company, but I don't really have a reason to think that they would just leave.
Dr. Cannon, I'm sorry, but you did not answer my question. Did the CEO say those words to you? Yes or no?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Cannon, I'd like to talk about what you just testified to about alternative causes of death. You contend that alcohol poisoning was a likely cause of death. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And you have worked with several alcohol poisoning cases. Isn't that right?
Yes, working at Massachusetts, I had several intoxicated people come to the ER.
Now, Dr. Cannon, in your own experience working with these cases, you have never seen someone die with a blood alcohol content of below 0.3%. Isn't that right?
That's true, but that is personally. I can't say for everybody working as a physician that they have never seen that, but personally I haven't.
Dr. Cannon, I was asking about your personal experience, so that is a yes to my question?
Yes.
Moreover, Genesis Petrillo had a blood alcohol content of below 0.3%. Isn't that right?
Yes, 0.16 at arrival at hospital, but I can't know the peak.
Dr. Cannon, to answer my question, she had a blood alcohol content of below 0.3%. Isn't that right?
Objection, asked and answered.
I'll overrule it. Go ahead.
Dr. Cannon, to be clear, Genesis Petrillo had a blood alcohol content of below 0.3%. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Moreover, your contention that alcohol poisoning was a likely cause of death does not explain the fact that pesticides were found in Ms. Petrillo's system, does it?
No, it does not, but I can't make for sure what exactly what was contaminated with organophosphate that ended up in her system.
But to be clear, that does not provide an explanation as to how the pesticides got into her system. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Moreover, you are aware that even just a small amount of pesticides can kill someone. Isn't that true?
A small amount, yes.
Now, I'd like to move on to your conclusions in today's case. You contended that pesticide poisoning was the most likely cause of Genesis Petrillo's respiratory arrest. Isn't that right?
Sorry, you broke up. Can you repeat the question?
Dr. Cannon, you are aware that pesticide poisoning, you contended that that was the most likely cause of Ms. Petrillo's respiratory arrest, correct?
It's the most likely, but it's not 100% sure. We still have the other three that Dr. Juan seemed to rule out.
Dr. Cannon, to answer my question, you contend that that is the most likely cause in your conclusions, correct?
Your Honor, I ask that the witness be allowed to answer the questions completely. Opposing counsel keeps cutting off the witness. She's giving
Your Honor,
explanation.
I
This
have
is-
given.
One second. Go ahead. One second. Go ahead, Ms. Garcia.
Yes, Your Honor, this is an expert witness. I ask that she be allowed to answer finish answering the question on cross-examination. Opposing counsel keeps cutting her off. I believe that there should be some leeway considering that she's an expert.
Mr. Silva.
Your Honor, I believe that I have given Dr. Cannon ample opportunity to answer my questions, and she has repeatedly avoided my questions. Therefore, I don't think that this is asked and answered.
Your Honor, may I respond?
I'm going to sustain the objection. I believe she's answered the question. I would like, because she's an expert, give her the opportunity to explain. Let me rephrase that. Not necessarily give her the opportunity to explain, give her the opportunity to answer the question before you would interrupt. Go ahead.
Dr. Cannon, you contend that it is most likely that the pesticide poisoning was the cause of Ms. Petrillo's respiratory arrest, correct?
As I said, I do agree with that, but it's not 100% sure since there's other possibilities like hepatic disease, the allergic reaction, and alcohol poisoning.
But those statements were in your report, correct? That that was the most likely cause?
Yes.
And that the most likely cause of that pesticide poisoning was from Harper Martini's wine. Isn't that right?
I know that the wine tested positive, but I don't know if it's 100%.
Sorry, Dr. Cannon, I did not mean to cut you off. No further questions, Your Honor. I pass the witness.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor. At this time, I ask that Dr. Cannon be excused.
Okay. Defense, call your next witness.
At this time, Your Honor, the defense also rests its case in chief.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take another break. Wait, no. Yeah, I believe we're supposed to take a break. Is that y'all's understanding that we take a break after both cases or just after closing?
It's up to your discretion, Your Honor. I believe all loss is at 12:55. I believe there might be time for a 5-minute break. I'm not sure how much time plaintiff has left for their closing.
We have about 7.5 minutes, so I would say a 5-minute recess is within time.
All right, we'll go ahead and take another break. We'll reconvene at 12:40. And remember, we are being live streamed, so don't do anything crazy. Okay, do we have everybody back? Plaintiff, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Defense, are you ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor.
Closing?
Just give me one moment, Your Honor.
Okay, so we're now going to hear closing arguments from each party. Everyone should please switch back to speaker view.
Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Petrillo was the problem and pesticides were the solution. Members of the jury, today we learned that there are two reasons why Harper Martini poisoned Genesis Petrillo. The first of them being that Genesis Petrillo stood between Casey Soto and Casey taking over the business. Second, Genesis stood between Casey and Harper Martini's relationship. And we proved that to you today by calling for you 3 witnesses. Moreover, by answering for you 3 questions. Why it happened, how it happened, and what actually happened on the night of June 7th, 2019. First, we answered for you, why did it happen? We called for you Casey Soto. Now, Ms. Soto testified to how Genesis and Casey had plans to move to Paris, France after the wedding. As we learned from the defendant, there was nothing more than he wanted than to stop the wedding. Why? Because they were moving to France, and that would get in the way of Casey taking over the family business. Ms. Soto testified to how when the defendant found out that they were planning on moving to Paris, his response was that he didn't care what happened to Genesis, whether she moved to France or ended up 6 feet under, so long as Casey Soto stayed in the Midlands. But as we learned here today, Casey did not want to take over the business. She wanted to go to Paris with the love of her life. But tragically, the defendant poisoned Genesis Petrillo. Next, we answered for you, how did the defendant poison Genesis? We called for you Dr. Jimin Kwan, and she testified to how pesticide poisoning was the cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. Most egregious of all, that pesticide poisoning occurred from the defendant's wine. Furthermore, Genesis Petrillo exhibited all the telltale signs of a pesticide poisoning case. Lastly, we answered for you what happened on the day of June 7th, 2019. We called Angel Rodriguez, and she testified to how there were multiple tense situations between Genesis and Harper Martini. Moreover, she testified to how just moments before the rehearsal dinner, the defendant walked into the kitchen where the Cara wine was being stored with a bottle of pesticides, to which he said, "This is for Genesis because Genesis is such a pest." Then at the rehearsal dinner, Harper gifted Genesis a bottle of wine. But as we learned here today, this was an outlier. The situations between them had been rife with tension leading up to that point. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have the burden to prove to you today that it is more likely than not 3 things. 1, that the defendant mixed pesticides in the wine that they gave Ms. Petrillo. And 2, that they did so with the intent to poison her. Moreover, that as a result, Genesis Petrillo died from the poisoned wine. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have fulfilled our burden today. By calling for you these 3 witnesses and answering for you all of these questions, we have fulfilled our burden. Now, defense counsel is about to come before you, and she's going to try and tell you that alcohol poisoning was the cause of Ms. Petrillo's death. But that is a gross mischaracterization of what happened. Because as we heard from the defense's own expert witness, pesticide poisoning was the most likely cause of Genesis Petrio's death. Moreover, that pesticide poisoning occurred from Harper Martini's wine. And worst of all, the defense's own witness stands to gain from chemical pesticides not being the cause of death. And lastly, Genesis Petrio's blood alcohol content was below 0.3%, which the defense's own expert witness has never seen a case in which that is proven fatal. Ladies and gentlemen, the jury, let that not deflect from all the evidence you heard here today. Petrio was the problem and pesticides were the solution. That is why I ask that you find the defendant liable for the battery of Genesis Petrio. Thank you.
Your Honor, may I proceed? Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, may it please the court. All it takes is one too many explanations. You heard a lot of things throughout the course of today's trial. But before I begin talking about that, I'd like to remind you a little bit about who Mr. Martini is. Mr. Martini is the father of Miss Casey Soto. He's a loving father, someone who put her interests and her well-being first. Mr. Martini is a hardworking businessman, someone who cares about his business and does what he can to succeed. Now, it's no secret that Mr. Martini and Miss Petrio didn't see eye to eye. But what's wrong with that? Even I don't always see eye to eye with my in-laws. It's not uncommon for things like this to be the case. Now, today we're here because the plaintiff wants you to believe that Mr. Martini is liable of battery against Ms. Petrio. But they had to prove this to you today, and they had to do this to a preponderance of the evidence. They had to show you three things. Now, all that a preponderance of the evidence means is that something is more likely than not. If you think of it like a scale, if at the end of today's trial, after we closed our case in chief, that scale tilted away from the plaintiff, then they have not met their burden. And that is the case today because they had to show you three key elements to prove battery. They had to show you that there was an act by Mr. Martini, that he did something. They had to show you that there was intent on Mr. Martini's part to cause Ms. Petrio harm. And finally, they had to show that there was harmful or offensive contact done to Ms. Petrio. Not once throughout today's testimony did you ever hear that Mr. Martini took some action to harm Ms. Petrio. And if he didn't take action, how could there have been intent? There was no intent on Mr. Petrio's harm because he never even took that first action, that first step. And we're not contesting that Ms. Petrio died, but there was no harmful or offensive contact done on the part of Mr. Martini. And that was clear throughout today's trial. You see, at the end of the plaintiff's case in chief, when they rested their case in chief, I could have sat down along with my co-counsel because it's important to note that today the defense has no burden. We didn't have to prove anything to you. We could have left it there. And at that point, you would have been required by law to find Mr. Martini not liable. But we didn't stop there. We still presented you with our own witnesses because we wanted to show you that there are simply one too many explanations in today's case. Now, today, you heard from a variety of witnesses. You heard from the plaintiff's witnesses that they believe it to be a case of pesticide poisoning. Now, the doctor provided by the plaintiff testified today that pesticide can be harmful in small amounts. The smallest amount can be deadly to a human. Now, that same doctor also testified that Miss Angel Rodriguez, a close friend of Miss Petrio, also drank some of that wine. If that wine had been poisoned, there's no explanation as to why Miss Rodriguez was fine, as to why she too was not poisoned like Miss Petrio. Now, you also heard from our witnesses. Now, Dr. Cannon explained to you that alcohol poisoning was a possibility. From Mr. Osborne, you heard that on the night of June 7th, Miss Petrillo was seen drinking quite a heavy amount of drinks. She drank an entire bottle of wine. She had a few shots of tequila. She had a few other drinks. Both doctors conceded that there is absolutely no way to accurately pinpoint someone's peak BAC without knowing every single thing that person drank and what the drinks were. Now, from Dr. Cannon, you heard about this alcohol impairment chart. Dr. Cannon talked about the symptoms that were consistent with alcohol poisoning that Ms. Petrillo was exhibiting, symptoms that the plaintiff's expert failed to mention. Now, you heard that the majority of these symptoms actually fell into the high risk, severe impairment, and life-threatening impairment areas. Symptoms like impairment of speech, inability to walk, unconsciousness, and respiratory failure. Now, both doctors have agreed today that respiratory failure is why Ms. Petrillo died. But ladies and gentlemen, there is simply one too many explanations. The plaintiff has not met their burden today, and that is clear after hearing all the evidence today. Now, this is my last opportunity to speak to you all. Plaintiff counsel still has one more opportunity to come up here and try to convince you of their case one more time. But before I leave, I'd like to leave you all with a little story. When I was younger, my grandmother used to tell me, when you're looking to accuse someone of something, don't point at them. And I would ask her, Grandma, why not? She would tell me, when you point at something, you have 3 fingers pointing right back at you. Now, we're not here saying that it's Miss Petrillo's fault that she passed away. We are not saying that at all. What we're saying is that while the plaintiff is over here trying to accuse Mr. Martini of battery, they have failed to look at all the other possible explanations. It's very unfortunate what happened to Miss Petrillo. But ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. Mr. Martini has not done anything wrong. At no point did you ever hear that Mr. Martini did something or intended to cause Miss Petrillo harm. There's only one just verdict. Find Mr. Martini not liable. Thank you.
Rebuttal, Your Honor. Oh,
I was muted.
oh okay, my apologies. Your Honor, opposing counsel, members of the jury, may it please the court. Opposing counsel just came before you and said that there are one too many explanations for Genesis Petrillo's death. So let's entertain opposing counsel for a second and go through those explanations. The defense's own witness contended that pesticide poisoning was the most likely cause of Genesis Petrillo's death. Moreover, that the cause of that pesticide poisoning was Harper Martini's wine. Because as you see, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, those one too many explanations, well, if Harper didn't do it, explain why Harper Martini walked to the kitchen with a can of pesticides. Explain why at the rehearsal dinner, Harper Martini said to drink this alone when you've had a moment to reflect on everything that you've done. Explain why the defendant didn't express an ounce of grief when their daughter-in-law died on what was supposed to be the happiest day of their life. You can't explain it, members of the jury. The only way you can explain it is by finding the defendant liable for the battery of Genesis Petrillo. Because as we learned here today, Petrillo was the problem and pesticides were the solution. Thank you.
Your Honor, you're muted.
Great, I was mumbling, so it didn't matter. Okay, so we are gonna tabulate and submit our ballots, and then I'll ask everyone to stay on until the judges have submitted their ballots, and then we'll do brief comments. I guess, I don't know if judges, if you want to go ahead and put in the chat when you're done, so I kind of know.
Yeah.
Or just come on whenever you're ready. Doesn't matter to me. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. All right. Do we have to wait for them to text us if they were submitted, or can we go ahead? Y'all know?
I believe that before we're supposed to start giving general comments, that they're supposed to make sure that the ballots are okay.
Yeah,
that's my understanding.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe closing ceremony is scheduled to happen at 1:15, as they just posted in Captain's. And I think as long as you received like the ballot confirmation that it was submitted, I think we're good to go as far as like general comments. That's how it's been in my previous rounds, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong.
That sounds good to me. I don't know exactly how Baylor is doing their stuff. I don't know how they've been doing it with the judges.
Yeah, because I don't think that we've had to like wait for someone to like come in and like say like.
Okay, yeah. Okay, well, that sounds good to me. That sounds good to me. I don't know what order we want to go in, judges. If anybody's kind of got stuff ready. Anybody wants to start?
I'll start. I have a lot of Just a lot of general stuff kind of targeted towards the Zoom format. I did mock trial in college in my first year of law school now. So I understand how totally different this year. And so a couple big things I think could help is using more screen sharing and demos. Like both teams did it in statements, but I definitely would have liked to have seen it with the experts. I think you could have done some cool stuff with the methods. It's just more interactive. It's hard to follow along as a judge on the Zoom format when you can't actually like look and interact with the people in person. So I think using demos, it doesn't cost anything. I think interactive demos are the best way. Like I liked in the closing for the defense, like they had the nose coming in. Like I think that's a little bit more effective than just having the words come in. So like if you can do more of that for like honestly, even every witness I think could have some kind of demo, which would help draw the judge in, because it's kind of hard on Zoom because you don't have the benefit of being in person. And then with the Zoom thing again, I would say make sure you're being even more engaging, especially as attorneys, on like direct or cross, to like really like emphasize your points, or like maybe use different phrasing to draw the judge back in. Like, oh, this is a really important point for the jury. Like just so like the judge knows to listen even closer, because it's very hard on Zoom to get that same kind of interaction that you get in person. So just using more cues for the judge, I think, would help a lot.
I'll go ahead and go. I thought it was fun. I mean, I enjoyed listening to y'all. I'm gonna really stick to, I want to talk about objections. I thought presentation, everyone did all right. I know it's probably weird in the format. I know mock trial, you're super formal and you want to be really polished and things like that, but I don't think there's anything that quite trumps the humanity aspect of it. And so, you know, we were dealing with a death, really tragic, you know, we had this love story, and I thought there were times where you guys could have played up the humanity part of it. For example, the cross of Casey, who did that? Cross of Casey, Miss Aguirre. That's correct, right? You did cross Casey. Is that right? Okay. So I would have just started off and like, it's your client's daughter, right? And so it doesn't have to be, yes, she's called by the opposing side, but she's not necessarily your enemy, right? Like there's a relationship there kind of. So I thought maybe starting off and like acknowledging that she's sad because she had just done this performance that's very emotional, of actually like acknowledging that like no matter who killed her, your fiance, soon to be wife, it's really sad, and it's sad that you have to be here. And so I think that just kind of those humanity stuff, it kind of helps you, I think, gain a lot of credibility with where you're going. And then you can go and hit her with whatever questions you want to hit her with. But the fact that you're acknowledging that like something sad really did happen, I think is, you know, good. Regarding the objections, something that, and I think I saw it a lot throughout, and so I don't have any specific person to kind of call out. But when you object, you don't just say objection hearsay. Like, I'm the judge, I'm not going to do your work for you. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to do all your A, B, C, D. This is why it's hearsay. You say, look, I'm going to object to hearsay. This is the statement I'm talking about. Especially when you're doing a conversation and there's two statements. Am I supposed to kind of rule on what statement I think you're talking about? Because I'm not going to do that. You know, I'm not going to guess what statement I think that you're talking about. You see, I'm going to object to Genesis statement that this specific thing happened. It's hearsay because of this, or for example. So just to throw out, especially the character evidence, you cannot just say objection character evidence, because once you start off like that, I'm already kind of like, oh, I'm not gonna sustain it. But then what the worst thing was, and this happened early on, I know this happened with De Silva, and I thought she did a really good job of Ms. Aguirre, you would object and just say like objection, and then she would say response. So she got to make her argument first when it's your objection and you should make the argument first. And so I thought that that was something that played into your opponent's hands, because now they got to tell me why it's not what you're saying. And then I'm actually hearing you on the defense when it really, you should be the one going for it and attacking it. So I thought that was kind of something. I don't know if you guys, if you guys want to know, if you guys can get my information, but I'll talk to you guys more about objections and stuff if you wanted. But I thought overall, good job. I thought you guys did a good job.
All right. Yeah, I thought everybody did a really good job. The main thing I noticed was some of y'all are reading, and there's a couple different ways I can tell. I can watch the tracking of your eyes, and also even if I couldn't tell that, it seems like the directs and crosses, some of them are pre-typed out. They're a lot more mechanical, and then during objections, you guys are really opening up and being fluid. And I'm saying, okay, well, they know what they're talking about. They have a really great knowledge, but they're still relying on the pre-written one. And I get it, it's on Zoom, it's pretty easy to get away with. But I would say to just ditch the notes. I mean, you guys are doing great. Another thing is, I mean, you're telling a story, right? So I think, I don't remember who did this, but it was, I'm going to explain why, how. I mean, there's like a certain logical way to go through the story. And I think in your opening statements, you should focus on what the other person did wrong, right? So if you're the plaintiff, start out with, here's what the defendant did wrong. Because as a juror, if you start talking about the victim, well, it gets me in an entirely different mindset. And what the trial is about is what the defendant did that got him there, right? But yeah, I think everybody did a great job. Unless anybody has specific questions, I can elaborate, but that's all I got.
Anybody have any questions? Any questions about my rulings that some probably at some point seemed arbitrary, but were not. I was actually trying. Any questions there? No?
Oh, one more thing. I think in Zoom, if I know you guys are having trouble with the format, I think you can just tap the space bar and hold it down and it'll unmute you. And then you can just let go of it and you're good to go. Also, some people are quiet. And I mean, it's understandable, but if you have that issue, maybe test it out in like a private Zoom, just throw in some headphones with a microphone if you have them. I think that will help you out quite a bit.
Okay, I think that's all we have. Thank y'all so much. Good luck. And keep working at this, and it's fun to hear. And I've been practicing for a little over 3 years now, and so I enjoy hearing fake cases. So I think you guys are doing a really good job, and want to encourage you guys to keep going and keep working on it.
What do you practice?
I'm sorry?
What do you practice?
I do primarily family law. So I am on Zoom a lot these days. Yeah, I do primarily family law. I do a little bit of criminal, but mostly family. So I get to be in the courtroom a lot. But
thank you so much to both of you for taking time out of your day to judge. We really appreciate it.
Thank
y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No worries. Thank y'all. Y'all did great. And actually, you were my judge for client counseling. I don't know if you remember.
Was I really? How interesting. Oh my God. Look, I judge a lot. Yeah.